8. Can I get a roll call?
Mr. Baumann.
Here.
Mr. Lightfoot.
Present.
Mr. McDowell.
Here.
Mr. O'Neill.
Here.
Mrs. Paul.
Here.
Mr. Swanson.
Here.
Mr. Welsh.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I got to read this whole thing, right? On behalf of the Board of Education, I would like to thank the public for attending tonight's meeting. We value the feedback we receive from our residents and encourage everyone to take an active interest in their public school system. Residents interested in speaking to the board this evening are asked to have completed a comment card and present it to the secretary to the board. When the secretary calls your name, I ask that you come to the microphone, state your name and address for the public record, and provide your feedback. Please note that comments are limited to 5 minutes per person and no discussion of personnel matters, including names or specific job titles, or responses to questions are permitted. The board does not participate in discussion during public comment. Follow-up to your questions or concerns will be addressed by the administration through the contact information provided on the comment card.
Lori Vancura.
Good evening. My name is Lori Vancura. I live at 2151 Wilson Creek Circle, Aurora, Illinois. The thing I want to bring up tonight, or the thing I want to talk about tonight, is some recent articles that were in the Ledger Sentinel about some election, some members of the board and their re-election campaigns. I first read the first article and was kind of reserving judgment until I looked into it a little bit further on my own. And to my surprise, and I looked on the 308 website, there was a whole section where you could actually read the Freedom of Information Act documents. Surprise, surprise. So I went and looked at the FOIA 1437 and started just kind of looking through those, and some things stuck out at me. Number one was dates, times, names who were carboned on these attachments, and then also that they were all sent from 308.org, which would be district computers that were used, or district emails that were used for proofreading and editing. The one email specifically said that the work of editing and cleaning up was done during the board meeting, which is very concerning to me, being a political junkie, number one, but number two, knowing that that kind of activity is potentially against the law. So then I looked in the District 308's website further and noticed that there were some things under the school board ethics and gift ban for the school board members, which states, no employee shall intentionally perform any political activity during any compensated time, as those are defined herein. And then it also says no board member or employee shall intentionally use district property or resources in connection with any political activity. Well, kind of looks to me like some political activity was done during a board meeting, and district resources were used to send contacts and PR contacts out for some board members seeking re-election. And to me, just this seems really kind of bogus to me. And then I called Eric Weiss's office to say, hey, is this proper? Is this stuff that should be done? And then he told me to file an official complaint with the school district, in which I did, and then with the ethics person, which I did. And I'm just really, really concerned that this all in my gut is kind of telling me that there might be some cover-up or some covering for certain members of the board. And as a voter and as a taxpayer, this really deeply concerns me that this type of activity is going on with our elected officials. I was really, really surprised about that. And especially at the November 10th board meeting, there was a statement by superintendent saying that no policy of this board had been broken at this time in any way. And a simple search on the board's website shows that those were in fact conflicts with what's stated in our board things. So anyway, that's my concern, and I wanted to bring it out into the public, and that I hope that the administration is cooperating with the Attorney General's office and my conversations with Eric Weiss. I hope that the remaining members of the board kind of look into this a little bit farther as well and authorize Eric Weiss's department to come in and investigate this a little bit further. If it turns out that I'm completely wrong in my hunch, I will sit up here and I will eat crow in front of all of you, and I will say I am wrong on this, but my gut is telling me that those attachments need to be released and this information needs to be out in the public, because we are going to be voting in April, and I think the taxpayers and the voters and us have a right to know if this in fact did transpire, because it is against election laws, and we've sent political people to prison in this state for doing those things. And at the public forum, I spoke about actions speaking
30 seconds.
And in this, actions here are not matching the words, and this is really just very concerning to me again as a taxpayer and as a voter. And thank you all for listening to me today.
Thank you.
Elizabeth Palatine.
Karen, do we have to wait? Should we wait? Are we okay?
Good evening. I am Elizabeth Palatine. I am the co-president of the Oswego Education Association. It is my pleasure to speak on behalf of our leadership team and our 1,100 plus teachers in our 24 buildings throughout the district. I want to recognize the dedication of the entire 308 team in our efforts to serve our communities. The team includes our teachers, support staff, transportation, maintenance, school board, administration, and of course parents. Through collaboration and discourse, we can find solutions that fit our common goals to best serve our students. We look forward to continuing our work with our board, along with the building and district administrators, on a very full agenda. On behalf of the OEA, we wish you a happy new year and look forward to a promising second semester. Thank you.
Thanks. Oh, fantastic. Look at us moving right along. Board member comments?
I just had one thing. I was looking through Dr. Wentz's weekly update and all the issues that have confronted our administration over the last calendar year, and it's pretty daunting when you look at all the issues that they have hit head on and dealt with, and have done a good job in juggling a lot of different things. And I just wanted to recognize the administrators for their hard work this year, and it has not gone unnoticed. They've had a lot on their plate and have not missed, to my knowledge, any deadlines, but if they do, I could probably give them a little slack, because they have been really on a lot of different issues. So I just wanted to give you all a heads up and a thank you for a job well done this year.
Go ahead.
Why are you looking at me, Alan?
Hi.
So I do want to, I'll go ahead and take the opportunity to make a couple of comments. When Mr. Ballman, you raised the issue at a meeting about a month ago, I fielded several questions from the press, and I answered several of them as openly, as honestly as I can. I will restate the facts as best I can here tonight, and I hope to hear from those of you that don't believe me, disagree with me. I'm happy to sit and talk to you. The situation was as exactly as it was presented. As we saw in the emails that were FOIA'd, a member of staff was working on an article about the upcoming election and which board members were going to be running again. He decided to include some factual information, biographical information about the candidates. That draft document was sent to myself as well as Bill. I got that document. and I corrected things that were wrong. I changed jobs in September, and so I've made some corrections there. And there was a section where I was asked to provide a quote. I wrote that information and passed that back. I never asked anyone, nor would I ever ask anyone in this administration to assist in the writing of any political document. We've been working together here as a board for almost 2 years. I think you guys all know me. I kind of pride myself at being very ethical. I would not ask someone to break the law, break elections law, to do anything like that on my behalf. It's interesting to read comments that I see in the newspaper and other places, and unfortunately it's speculation and rumors. And, you know, unfortunately some of these people may have other motives for bringing this up. But again, the reality is a draft was written, it was sent to me. I corrected some information that was in it. It was my understanding that article was going to go out. It never went out. And at that point, I just confirmed that it wasn't going out, and I had actually written yet a separate couple paragraphs announcing my re-election, and the only thing I did was ask for the list of media properties that we talked to, because I was concerned about missing a few. And I sent those out. I sent those out from my home email account, and I'm happy to share or show those documents to anybody that wants to see that. I have nothing to hide. And I'm sorry that it's distracting us from the work that the district needs to do in ensuring that we're moving the district forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Brent. I appreciate you telling us about it again. I also appreciate him being upfront and honest about it. And that's, in my opinion, the problem with public comment is that we can't respond sometimes. And there are times where we should, because quite frankly, the state's attorney or the attorney general will make that decision, not us. So I appreciate it. On a lighter side, maybe, I did go to the Planning Commission meeting, Hudson's Point, and I learned some things and had more questions. In particular, we sent a letter from the board saying that we wanted cash in lieu of land. Hudson Point, as you know, is proposed to be 1,333 homes, which is approximately 450 students, according to them. However, I sat through the meeting and I learned some interesting things that I just wanted the board to be aware of, and I will make a copy of this somehow once I figure out how to copy an 11x14 and send it to you. But the village's current comprehensive plan calls for an additional 677 students within a half mile of Hudson Point, which is probably, at their calculation, about 3,000 more homes. There was some other parts of it that I had some questions on. For instance, there's a section that calls for ranch villas, which is 304 units. So I got up and asked the question if those were strictly 55 and older. And the response was that they would sell them with some kind of disclaimer that they just couldn't put a swing set in the backyard. So those could also be single-family homes. The second concern I had was the second commercial lot, which is on Route 30. If you look at it, it says commercial, and then underneath it says new zoning in apartments. So I also asked the question about that piece. If the response that I got was if they don't sell it within the first 5 years, there's going to be 260 more apartments. So just those two adds another 600 apartments. And then my other major concern is this Wickaduke Trail, which is a 5-lane or a 4 to 5 lane highway, essentially, that connects many different counties but runs right through the middle of this subdivision. You can't have kids walk over a 5-lane highway. So that was a concern to me, which I brought up to them. So you will have to bus these kids. Another concern I had was when they were speaking of this, they said that the nearest junior high was Bednarsik. And somebody had asked where those kids would go, and I made a very distinct point to them when I left as well as in the meeting, that you may wave at it when you walk or when you see it out your front door, but you probably will not attend that school. So that the biggest concern I had was that they're selling this, telling people you have a junior high right here, and it's Bednarsik, but those kids aren't going to go to Bednarsik. Probably.
I believe the current boundaries would send those students to Murphy.
Which is what I said. Those kids are going to get bused, even if they can see it out their front door. And then RSP, there was some concerns too from, what's that one little corner? Is it Blackberry Knoll? I'll come back to you on that. There was one concern about one little corner that we bus now. RSP, I asked the gentleman who was in charge of this, because I know we just had our RSP report, and they said that it included all of the new growth. So my question was, when you spoke to RSP, did you include the fact that there could be up to 560 plus units available? And he didn't have an answer for me. So he was supposed to contact RSP, who was supposed to contact you, which I do not know if that happened yet. And then my other last question was, if we decide to take cash instead of land for this, because the last time I believe we discussed it was when we did the other property. We talked about, I don't know if I brought it. We talked about the apartments on Mill Street, Orchard and Mill. Right? That was the last time we visited this. So I just wanted to make sure that the board was aware that there is the potential for a huge number of kids just from this one area. And where does the land cash money go? Does that go into the general fund?
No, it cannot.
Where does it go?
There's
Construction account, things like that. Save back to purchase property, for example.
Okay. So I just wanted to make sure the board was aware, and I will send this out to you. And I mean, I picked up all the papers so that I could copy them and send them out. I just got busy working. That's it.
Allie, what's the number of units? Because I've heard a number of different numbers bandied.
Well, the number of units in their proposal, their original proposal, was 1,333 homes. But that was, and I couldn't find where they broke it into apartments, but, I mean, you can count, I did my best.
For comparison, how many homes are in Churchill? That's a large neighborhood.
I don't know.
I don't know.
I thought it would be more like Lakewood Creek with all the townhomes and apartments.
The rough planning number that I believe we, and when I say we, I was just saying that the rough planning number that us and other districts and other communities use is about 1.2 to 1.3 children per household.
Per household, right.
Slightly less for apartments. So I'm just...
I just wanted to
I'm
know
not
if
saying
those
no,
extra numbers were included in RS. Like, I had some more questions. And the village tabled it to the following week.
So is the village's concern that we sent a letter in saying that we want land cash in lieu of land?
Well, I will tell
Or
you that
future
I know that we sent the
building?
letter.
Yes.
But when they presented to the people who were at this meeting, they presented as if they were giving us land. It almost like they hadn't even read the letter. I mean, in my opinion. So
So did the village did not represent that we submitted a letter?
No, the village said that we
cash?
did, but
Oh,
when they
okay.
did their presentation, they were still. And I asked, what if we don't take the land and if we take the cash, how many more houses does that put in? I don't think I wrote down that number, but they said not very many.
It was about, what, 30 acres?
Yeah.
Who
30
did,
acres.
who did the presentation?
Wasn't
Wasn't it the developer?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think for the good of the board, just a few things that you need to consider. Number one, unless the board directs the superintendent to do anything different, that letter stands as the official statement of School District 308. And so the decision to accept cash
over land has been made. That won't get changed. Number two, I'll be at that meeting next month. Number three, the village of Oswego, my understanding, was not there to present either how they feel or how we feel. This was a developer. We've been on this topic for several months, and it's not going to change. They have numbers, and if I was selling homes, I would have numbers. And I think everybody knows that an elementary school will do a lot to sell homes. I don't fault them for that. We just don't need the property. And I think in last week's Ledger, the Ask Dr. Wint column, I tried to lay out, we have to remember that we have several thousand seats available. Now, they may not be available, and that's why I stated to the developer, you're correct. There are schools at capacity. However, you haven't factored in the changing of boundary lines. And as we would adjust boundary lines, we create capacity. I think it would be a hard sell to purchase or receive property with the idea that we would put a school where we don't need it under the auspice of having several thousand seats. And I know that hasn't gone over well with the developer. I wish them well. Their job is to sell homes, and our job is to make sure that we have schools in the right location. And our demographer has been a part of the process, but I just don't believe they're on the same page as
Can
far
we
as
just
numbers.
double check on those extra units? Because what
I
concerned
will
me
certainly
more
ask.
was not just that property, but the other property that was mentioned that had 600 plus more kids coming from it, which is another huge development in that same.
Well, and I know you know this, but you've got dirt right now, and I don't know if they shared this. Oftentimes they don't, but they'll share numbers, whether it's 1,500 or 1,700 homes, the number of apartments, and then they'll throw in numbers of kids. And we have to remember that, and I don't know if they shared this, but that's a phased-in approach. And when we met with them, that was at minimum, 8 years. Most likely in the economy we're in, it's going to be closer to 12. So if you add 12 years to 2015, you can understand that there'll be also other developments underway at different phases. And so not all of the six. I don't know that I disagree with the 500 or 600 kids. We can be off 30 or 40. But it really doesn't make any difference when you factor in that they won't all come in year 1 or 2. That's an 8, 10, 12-year process, and we're fairly confident that that entire area, including the region that we're sitting in right now, will look much different in 2025, 2026, 2027.
In the number of students, that's across K through 12. So that's spread out where we have.
I just wanted to make sure that
Yeah.
the board knew that.
Yeah.
As I.
No, but just for clarification to the public, that's spread out across all grade
The only
levels.
thing I would say about pedestrian access is it's not really up to the school district.
No.
But it does not hurt for us to ask that school kids be giving a safe access, and I'm sure the village will take that into consideration. But
They're very open to our ideas.
yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I just want to take a second to apologize to the board for missing last week's meeting and being late tonight. I heard about 1 hour. Actually, by the time I was able to log on, you were asking for a motion to end. So I understand that it's me that goes past 1 hour, so I take that. So I apologize for being late tonight and missing public comment, but it couldn't be helped. So now superintendent's report.
Just 2 items.
Also,
I'm
committee
so sorry.
reports.
Oh, I thought you said
We skipped it. Sorry.
sorry. He whispered to me superintendent, so
Greg, do you want to start?
I apologize.
Okay. We had our Finance and Operations Committee meeting tonight. We've seated new members, and we have a very rich agenda coming up for this year. One of the things we covered today was the construction grant update. We had an update from PMA, and well, mostly his update was what we would do maybe with the money if we got it. When I'm referring to the $49 million in the Capital Development Board of Illinois promised to School District 308 and all the other districts at the time for the 2004 construction work that was done. So this goes back almost 10 years. But all the schools that applied for 2002 and 2003 work have been paid. So the 2004, we're on that list, and so far everybody's been paid, so we're assuming that they will continue that practice and that we will eventually get that money. But we are trying, and according to Dr. O'Malley, I think this is a good idea, to put together a plan on what we would do with that money should we get it, so that we can present a resolution to our legislators about what we would do with the $49 million, hoping that that would give them something to go in and fight for us, so that we're not just waiting for the money, that we're making a proactive attempt to try to speed this process up a little bit. Otherwise, we just sit and wait. I think we have some great advocates down in Springfield, and I think if we give them something to go by, like a plan, that it will help, and it will help push this legislation through quicker. So we'll also take this topic up at our next, I know this is one of the hot topics we're going to use at the legislative committee meeting. So between the two committees, we'll come up with some sort of resolution to bring to the board that basically outlines a spending plan for that money that we feel the legislatures would like. It would benefit undoubtedly the taxpayers of this community, and that's something our legislatures would like to probably take a little credit for too. So we don't care as long as we get the $49 million. We also had a 5-year maintenance and energy plan overview. This is a good thing. This is something that I think that we've talked about since I've been on the board that's been lacking, is that we need a comprehensive plan, not just a year-to-year, what's broken this year. We need to know what the useful life of our assets are and when we can expect to have to make capital outlays to repair this equipment, these buildings, these roofs, these heating and air conditioning systems. And we now have that, and we also have an energy plan, and we also have cost data that goes with that. And that's the bad news. The bad news is that we really do not have a annually funded operations and maintenance budget. And so what we did this year was we borrowed money from the construction project funds to pay for that. I think there's probably a little bit of that money left over for next year, but after that there will be no more money, at least from those sources. So this board's going to have to start thinking about, and this may be part of the use of the $49 million I was just referring to. We may commit some of that money to getting a fund started, but this is a one-time payment. Operations and maintenance is an ongoing expense, and we're going to need to find a revenue stream that's also ongoing if we're going to take this on in a realistic way. So something to think about. We have a plan, and I'm pretty sure that the board members will have access to those numbers, right? So they can look over I believe there's 3 levels of maintenance. I think high priority, mid, low priority type situations, and you know, if we were to fix everything, it would be over 25, $26 million over 5 years. I think some of the critical issues, though, are still adding up to $6 or $8 million over the next 5 years, and we have yet to identify the revenue stream that would cover that. So, also had a sales tax presentation. The state of Illinois has passed legislation which allows school districts to put a sales tax referendum on the county ballot. How that works is only school districts or a school district or group of school districts which have over 50% of the student enrollment may place that initiative on the ballot, which leaves Oswego School District, because we have
57%, meaning that even if all the other districts in the county wanted to do this, they could not without our approval. So it's basically up to the Oswego School District as to whether this would or would not go on the ballot. This would be all of Kendall County, not the Oswego School District territory, and it would be voted on by all the voters of our county with a simple majority to pass or not pass. It is a permanent tax. It can be placed on the ballot in quarter-cent increments up to 1 cent. If the full 1 cent was levied, the share that Oswego School District would likely get under the current sales tax that are currently being collected would be around $5 million annually. That would be our share. It's based on a per student head count, basically. This is how the state calculates that. So we would get roughly 57% of the county sales tax to our district, which is about $5 million annually. We have yet to fully vet this at the committee level, and we are going to have a more in-depth discussion on this topic in the next meeting, and at which time we will probably be bringing it forward to the board for your consideration. So that's all I have. Do you have anything more, Brent?
Yeah, I'll just thank you, Greg. I would just say that so the board understands the construction grant update. There's not yet anywhere near consensus from the Finance Committee as to how that money should be divided if we do get that money. And so the next meeting that we have, we're going to kind of deep dive into some different scenarios and options so that we vet that a little bit better before it comes to the board. There's a concern of if we take part of it and start to abate taxes, obviously there's an immediate reduction in taxes for the taxpayers and homeowners, which is a wonderful thing. The problem is the scenario that we specifically looked at. That abatement only lasts for about 5 years, and then the rate goes back up. It also adds to our debt. It pushes up the life of our debt out about 3, almost 4 years beyond where it would currently expire now. And some people have some kind of paused feelings about that, right? So we're having a good, healthy discussion. It's going to be another meeting before we probably have anything. But I think if we look at the 3 topics tonight, we can put them all together, right? We need to find a way to reduce our debt, a way to either maintain and or lower taxes, and a way to continue to operate our facilities that are now getting to the point in time where even though we have beautiful facilities, we have to spend a little bit of money to keep them in the shape that they're in. And so that was a jam-packed meeting tonight of very critical things that we're going to be looking at.
When does our debt expire? Somewhere around 29 or 31? Is that right?
So right now,
31, I think it is.
I have it right.
Where is that?
So if we were to do nothing, the majority of the debt would be retired in 2029. Right?
Little stragglers there.
The issue, as we've talked about as a board before, is right now we're at $34 million a year that we're paying in bond and interest payments. That number would climb to over $41 million by 2020. So it's kind of we have to do something about it, and so we are doing something about it. There's going to be a lot of different options of how to solve for that, and I think we're going to come up with some creative ideas, and the board can expect to see that in the coming months.
Thank you. Okay, now Dr. Went.
I just want to begin by saying congratulations to the board. Your initiative on online learning passed the General Assembly. It was a lot of work. Our Laura is here with our law firm, and I don't know where I would end with all of the help that that was needed in order to move this forward. It's not every day that you take a waiver to the state board and the state board takes a look at it and not only wants to discuss it, but believes that this is the right direction for schools in Illinois. And that did not hurt us at all at the General Assembly. I will say that I owe gratitude to our staff, but also specifically our OEA, our relationship with our faculty and the association. It was nice to be able to testify before the education committees, but quite frankly, it was even nicer when the lobbyist for the association sat down beside me to say this was the right thing to do. And so that doesn't happen every day. Out of all of the emails I received, that surprised even legislators. It's not something that happens on a regular basis. It's a great relationship we have, and Elizabeth and Andrew and all of our associations in the district. And we don't always agree on a Tuesday, but normally by Friday we're there. And after a few meetings, and I suppose that makes us a little better in the end. So congratulations. There was a tweak in our waiver. They're going to allow us to do it for 2 years. And as Chairman Chico said at the state board meeting, the only thing they asked us to do is to do it right and do it well. So we will do that, and we will continue to work with our faculty, and we will bring online courses on in a professional manner over time, and I think it'll be a very good thing for the district. I happen to be in a class, and I would invite the board at any time to visit either one of our high schools. I happen to be at Oswego High School visiting a class. It used to be called the Challenge class. It's now called the Success class, and Phil does an outstanding job there with a total of 138 students who he sees during the course of a day or a week. There were 28 students in class when I visited, and out of the 28, and these are kids that come from some very challenging backgrounds. Their home structure is not the strongest. Some of them have been in and out of alcohol and drug abuse treatment centers, and they have challenges that most of us around the table simply do not have. So what can we do with them to ensure that they graduate from high school? Well, we have to think differently. I asked them what was one of the hardest things that they found to accomplish, and the answer was getting to school by 7:30 in the morning. And quite frankly, if I lived in some of the conditions that they live in, I'm not certain I would be able to get to school at 7:30 in the morning. So we are challenged as a district to not look at one brush across the district that meets the needs of every kid. These are kids that will do better at 7:30 p.m., not 7:30 a.m. And they have jobs not because they want a new car, they have a job because they're paying the electric bill. We now have 86 students that are homeless in the district, and we have to approach education in a different way. And so as we begin to end the month of December and call a close to 2014, we need to think about what we can do that was much different than when mom and dad were in school. And that is when we host school. It has to be, our high schools need to be open. I can assure you that maybe even now, but most evenings around 7 p.m., 6 p.m., we can walk into any high school and there's an athletic practice or event that's taking place. I hope by August we can walk into one of our high schools, if not both, and see class in session. What was wonderful, Mr. O'Neill, was that when I walked into that class with 28 students, 23 of them were on a computer taking an online class. It works. It's different than when you and I were in school, which is probably a good thing. But it works. It's what they need. It's what they want. The state board agreed. Congratulations, you made history in the state of Illinois. The second topic is the legislative committee. We will be posting this week and next week advertisements in media and at our website. We have several people who've already contacted the district wanting to help us serve on the legislative committee. We look forward to not only fighting for our $49 million, which please make an asterisk in your notebook, that it is not going to get easier to get that 49 million because we have people across the state of Illinois in elected office who have decided that those dollars could be better utilized purchasing technology for over 800 school districts in the state of Illinois. Although I'm a big technology fan and I think that we ought to be purchasing and implementing technology in the district, I find it very sad that we would begin to take dollars meant for school construction and begin to reallocate those dollars to other purposes. It sounds like a first or second cousin to Senate Bill 16, where we just take money from here and we begin to move it somewhere else and call it a new finance formula. It is wrong, 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 and we need to do something about it. So we need to consider that resolution. And if it's all going to be used for tax relief, then put it in the resolution. If some of it's going to be put into maintenance, great. I think we can explain it to taxpayers. Let's take the resolution to every legislator, get our committee together, go to Springfield and hang out for a while and get their attention, because we're not the ones who are just asking for 49 million. We're the ones that got online learning in the law. So let's stand up and count as an 8th largest district in the state. And we matter, and we need to move this thing forward. So if you're interested in legislative committee, call our office, sign up, and we'll get started. And everybody would agree that it's not just about finance. We need some help at the legislative level with regards to academics as well. In fact, one of those is on the list tonight, 5.4. I'll reserve my comments until then. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to remind the board that we're planning a meeting next Monday. I sent that note out on the 14th of November with follow-up, and we'll talk through that tonight as well. And thank you, Allie, for leading the meeting last week and in the beginning tonight. Okay, we'll move on to consent agenda.
I make a motion to approve all items under consent, including 4.1 minutes from the November 24th, 2014 regular board meeting open session, and November 17th special Board of Election public question and answer session.
Second.
Mr. Lightfoot.
Aye.
Mr. McDowell.
Aye.
Mr. Baumann.
Aye.
Mr. O'Neill. Mrs. Paul.
Aye.
Swanson.
Aye.
Mr. Walsh.
Aye, motion carries 7-0. Information 5.1. Are there any questions or comments on FOIA? 5.2. Financial statements. Are there any questions or comments for Dr. O'Malley? 5.3. Presentation EL dual language audit. Dr. Wendt.
Back in the spring, we brought a presentation to the board outlining our issues and concerns and rewards and challenges and all the good news and other area news regarding the EL dual language programming. It was part of a comprehensive presentation. There were questions regarding data. Most of those have been corrected. However, since that time, it was agreed that we would move forward with what could be a first phase, if it pleases the board, or a multi-phase audit over EL specific to dual language. Most of the audit is focused on dual language. Again, if the board desires, as I mentioned last spring and summer, to move forward with any other audit or a second or third round of audit for EL programming, we're certainly open to doing that. However, we did move forward. We've made a lot of decisions in the last 30 months. One of the best decisions we made was to hire the ECRA group here in Illinois to guide the audit. I've been around this business long enough to where I've seen some audits, and this one will stack at the top as far as the ability to get in and ask people the appropriate questions and do so in a very professional manner. We found that in the writing. The audit is officially online at our website as of right now, and we appreciate the opportunity to have John and Steve and Ann with us. They all three bring different expertise and a background, and we appreciate you taking the time to be with us. Steve, I believe you've made maybe about 50 copies. All right. And Dr. O'Malley and Dr. Sparlin, would you be kind enough we won't have a hard copy for everyone, but we do have some copies for everyone, or at least the first 50. And then online, if you want to access it, again, it's at our website. So if you would come forward, and we apologize, there's 3 chairs, and is there one mic, Dr. Sparlin, or 2? All right. There's 2? Okay. Well, give the mic to Ann and Steve, because John, just the and we only conversation we've had with ECRA is to provide us with a report. We know that it was sanctioned by the board, and the board has had the audit for the last week, and there have been some questions submitted, and I appreciate you responding to those questions. And those questions that were asked have been shared with the board, if that helps in your presentation. And then we're here tonight to hear from you, and the board has the opportunity to question you.
Well, great. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is John Gada. I'm the president of ECRA Group, and I'm here with Ann Paternostro and Steve Humphrey. And what we'd like to do tonight is just give you a little bit of a backdrop of the report. You've had the report. We don't plan to do too lengthy of a presentation, but to make sure that we get all your questions answered, to make sure that you fully understand what went into the evaluation and ultimately how some of the findings were arrived at. And so just a brief little thing about ECRA Group for those of you that don't know. ECRA is a research and evaluation consulting firm. We do work nationally helping school districts have better access to information to make really high-stakes decisions, and that's really what we do. And so program evaluation is definitely our wheelhouse, and so we feel like the information that's provided here tonight is going to help the Board of Education process some of these issues. Let's talk a little bit about evaluation scope and sort of what the evaluation was, what the evaluation wasn't, and how it was structured. So again, we looked at the entirety of the EL program from a structural perspective, but a special emphasis was placed on the DL program. And so if you think about EL as sort of the parent, and then you have DL as a component. And so certainly the evaluation looked at the totality of how you're structuring EL, but we really did special instructional focus on the DL program. So there are findings related to larger structural pieces, and then there are more micro findings related specifically to the DL program. And again, that was by design. And really driven by 2 straightforward questions. What are students in dual language program learning, and what does the dual language program cost? And that really drove our evaluation and drove the information as to how we collected it. So at the end of the day, we can answer those questions, and we're here to give you some pretty definitive answers as to what we found in relationship to those questions. Before I even get started with the national context and some of the backdrop pieces of this is, in talking with so many of the staff and the leadership and the administration, there is no doubt that the people here in Oswego are really committed. I mean, the faculty is really committed, the parents are committed, the community is committed, the administration's committed. I mean, there's just a really strong sense of commitment, not only to this program, but all programming. And so it's one of those things where as we get into the finding, there are larger structural issues that just can never be overcome by people. And people can have the best intentions of the world, but if there are structural pieces that just don't allow for effectiveness, it's not going to happen. I'm going to elaborate a little bit more on that. But if you look nationally, sort of at this issue, and all this kind of started in 1968 with the Bilingual Education Act, and so that sort of set the stage nationally for these kinds of programs. That was replaced by NCLB in 2001, which really shifted the emphasis on English language proficiency and changed the focus from bilingual education really to English language acquisition from a federal policy standpoint. But bilingual does require bilingual education, so there are federal policies that have running that have sort of shifted through the reauthorization of federal No Child Left Behind, but then you still have state policy as well. And so state policy still requires that you have TBE programs and TPI programs, and roughly 2% of EL students in Illinois are enrolled in dual language. And so
if you were to look at things larger as to what, how prevalent are dual language programs, across the state, it's definitely a growing programmatic trend, but still in a minority. And currently, the structure of the EL program is as follows, and this is where I'm going to transition into the idea that what we found overall in this evaluation is that there are just large structural issues with the program, systemic issues in the program that probably need to be looked at, because the effectiveness of the programs is going to be limited far more by the current structures than they are by any personnel in those structures. Very committed people. And one of the things that we have seen over and over in doing these kinds of evaluations is structure and process often dictates performance more than the people in them if they're not set up the right way. And so we're going to speak to you at length as far as what some of those pieces are. I'm going to take you through 3 findings, and then I'm going to pass it over to Ann to take you through some of the detailed findings. But in general, what statements can we make about the evaluation, both the EL program and the DL program that's a component of that? Is the first piece is there are some compliance issues. There are things that just are not in compliance currently, and Ann's going to elaborate on that. And so, those are things that are fixable, but at the current state, you have compliance issues. The other piece is that the current program, the EL program and the DL program, really perpetuates inequities. You have various structural pieces that create inequities. And so the first inequities you have are the EL programs overall, including DL, don't have the support infrastructure as the general programming does. And so in the language of the law, you're not really setting up your EL program for a reasonable shot at success, because you really don't have the support infrastructure on the EL side of your programming as you do on in the general education side. Then once you get into the EL program, if you can conceptualize that diagram, then there are inequities between the DL programs and the TBE programs. And some of those inequities have to do with resources and what's available to the DL program versus what's available to the TBE programs. But other inequities have to do with just sheer access to those programs. It's, when you look at the way those programs are structured, and you look at some of the policies that exist here within the district, for a district this size, for an entire program to only have eligible in a particular year maybe 15 spots, people are fighting for it, because of the fact that you start off with a very limited number, and then there's grandfathering clauses for families that have been in the program to remain in the program. You end up with not many spots for such a large district, and that creates inequities. And so that's another example of some of the inequities that do exist. And there are even some inequities that have shown up on student outcomes that have been talked about. And really, some of this is related to the consistent quality program design implementation. And you have had inconsistent, by inconsistent I mean changes in leadership. Over the last 10 years, you've had 7 heads of this program. And so, again, great people, committed people, this doesn't happen overnight. These kinds of structural deficiencies, if you will, happen over a long period of time. It's happened over 10 years. And so when you have revolving leadership and you have those kinds of characteristics, you end up with a program that's a little bit broken. And so there are some specific findings related to that. So let's get the first one off. There were 2 questions that this evaluation was driven on. What are students learning, and what does it cost? The one I want to hit first, I'm going to do it in reverse order. And the reason we're going to do it in reverse order because we think it's important to get this off the table. The headline here is not finance. Any cost variances between the DL program and other district programs are negligible. As it relates to the governance function of the board, as you work through the information contained in this report, I don't think finance plays any pivotal role. If you were to look at the report, you're going to find that if you were to get really specific about it, you would actually come to the conclusion that the DL program costs less than the general program. That's part of the reason why the inequities exist too, because you don't have the support infrastructure. You don't have a lot of the interventionists and other ancillary pieces in the EL part of the programming as they do as the other pieces. And so consequently, if you were to really count it, it probably costs a little less, but it's negligible. It's negligible. Why? Because the difference is very small, and you're dealing with a small number of students. A district this size, I can't imagine that the kinds of numbers that we're talking about really factor into any major decision.
Did transportation get included in that too?
The transportation is that all things together, this is not a finance issue. Now, student outcomes, that is. And so one of the things that we found is there are some nuances of what students are learning. This is the second part of the question. Some of them we can answer, some of them we can't answer. And so the first piece that we can answer is that for English language learners served by the dual language program, they do outperform their counterparts that are not in the dual language program. I want to define the word outperform. We're talking about academic progress. We're talking about growth. We are not talking about achievement status or how they perform at any one period of time. We're talking about the progress that they make over time. And there is pretty compelling evidence, it's in your report, that the English language learners that were served by the dual language program do outperform their counterparts. Now the story gets a little bit more interesting as you start to dig in.
Sorry, could you say that again? I missed it.
So the English language learners, the non-English language native students that are learning English, actually learn English at a faster rate if they were served by the dual language program than if they weren't. That is a finding of the report. Now, if you dig into that, though, there's some other parts of that story. If you look at the effects of the dual language program to the non-dual language program as it relates to mathematics, those students do not perform as well. And so while they're learning English a little bit better, they're not learning math as well. And if you were to do some of the different disaggregations that's contained in the report, that's true of the native English speakers too. So your native English speakers that are served by the dual language program are growing in mathematics at slower rates than the counterparts that are not in the dual language program. If you look at reading, pretty equivalent. And so as you think about the programs in their totality, that is certainly one area to look into.
Hey, did we check the amount of time they spend in math versus their counterparts? Like how many, like an hour a day or?
But, at the end of the day, you have to, the goal of a lot of these dual language programs is certainly you want to provide for bilingual opportunities and cultural competence, but those should be in addition to, not at the expense of other core language areas. So the fact that you would have programming, but you may be sacrificing in a core content area like math is a little bit concerning. And so that's something that should be looked at. The other piece that is really important is, as to this question, what are students learning, is there is no assessment program in place to know whether students are actually developing skills in Spanish language, because you don't test students in Spanish. And if a goal of the program, like it is the dual language program, is to create biliterate, bicultural students, you should have assessments in place to measure whether or not that's happening. Those assessments aren't in place, and so that is a question that remains unanswered and probably will remain unanswered until the district implements an assessment program that they can actually measure those language acquisition skills. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Anne to go through some of the more detailed findings.
Our next finding is in the area of compliance. And as John mentioned, there are systemic problems with the district's entire EL program that have resulted in areas of noncompliance with state and federal regulations for programs of instruction for English learners. I'm going to start with the federal because that's a little simpler. Basically, NCLB requires programs for English learners to do two things. One, have quality content instruction that's aligned to your state's academic standards, and two, have high quality English language instruction that's aligned to your state's English language proficiency standards. And that second component of NCLB is not in place here. The district does not have a standards-based curriculum for English language development. So
while you have teachers that may be aligning their instruction to the standards, systemically that's not happening. Okay, so that's out of compliance with NCLB. Then regarding compliance with the state, as you know, in 2011, the state came in and did a EL program audit. They found your EL program to be out of compliance with ISB school and administrative code in 19 different areas. Now, I know the district has worked to remedy some of those compliance issues, but it is still out of compliance in many of those areas. And since that 2011 audit took place, there's been changes to school code that have resulted in additional requirements that the district is not in compliance with. So compliance, remains a big issue with your program in terms of state and federal requirements. Our next finding involves equity, which John alluded to, and basically we found that English learners do not have equal access to the educational opportunities and programs as non-English learners do. And this, as again John alluded to, is a multifaceted finding. In the first part, we found that students in the district EL programs, including the DL program, do not have instructional resources and supports comparable to those that students in the mainstream programs have, thereby denying English learners a realistic chance of success. Both the DL and the TBE programs lack resources, especially Spanish resources. And I know that your teachers are provided with materials in English for subjects they're told they need to instruct in Spanish. So they're taking their own time outside of the school day translating materials for instruction because they haven't been provided with adequate resources.
But hang on, by the same token, science teachers don't always get books that we teach out of, much like our math curriculum. We haven't had textbooks in math for 10 years until this year. Right? Because I am a teacher, I get a little, you know what I mean? Like, that's my job. My job is to take my book, align it to standards, and teach my kids.
Yes,
So,
and in addition, your teachers also have to do all that and then
Right.
translate everything into another language.
which I also do on some occasions. So not in the same extent. But, listen, all I'm saying is, as teachers, we have jobs to do. And we're provided with resources, and no, we don't always have perfect resources. Any teacher sitting in this room knows that. But you do the best with what you have.
And I will say that
And they are.
your teachers are doing an unbelievable job given what they have. There's the other area is your students in the TBE and dual language programs do not have access to the same types of support services as students in the mainstream program. There are no bilingual reading improvement teachers, bilingual interventionists, bilingual special ed teachers, bilingual speech and language pathologists, bilingual psychologists, social workers. So those necessary supports for success are not available to these students.
Do we have those in any buildings?
What? Speech path?
Bilingual.
Bilingual? It
Not
doesn't
that I'm
sound
aware
like
of.
it.
I will. I'm just curious as we go along. Can we check on that?
There was at one point a bilingual reading improvement teacher for a couple years, but she was moved into a classroom position, if I'm not mistaken. In addition, I want to point out that, again, inequities of the same supports. Many of your elementary TBE students are traveling over an hour each way on buses to their serving school, which quite often makes them late. They get there after the start of the school day. Then these students also qualify for free and reduced lunch. So instead of heading to class, they head to the cafeteria for breakfast. So by the time they reach their classroom, they've already missed a chunk of instructional time. And their serving school offers support before school in the morning. So students who need additional help can come in before school and get that extra assistance. But because these students are bused to this school and get there too late for extra supports, they don't have access to the same type of extra help and support as the mainstream students for whom that is their home school. So, and we just want to give you, some examples of, the findings. Our next finding is that even within the EL program, there's inequities between the dual language program and the TVE program. And that first inequity is really in your program models. You have two completely different program models serving one population of students. Those program models have divergent visions and outcomes for students. So in the dual language program, you have an additive bilingual program, and you're saying to your Spanish-speaking English learners in that program that we value the language and culture that you bring to our schools. We believe it's important for you to continue to maintain that language and heritage. And we think it's so important and so wonderful that we want these other students to learn your language and culture. Okay? Then you have the TVE program, which has a totally different vision and outcome. To those students, Spanish-speaking English learners in the TVE program, you're saying, we're going to put you in a subtractive model. We don't value your language and culture. We're going to use your native language initially for instruction so that you don't fall behind. But then we want to supplant that with English. We want to assimilate you into the mainstream language and culture. So you're taking one set of students who qualify for bilingual education and putting them into two very different programs. And right there, you're creating inequities for that group of students based on the program model that they're in. Again, we mentioned materials. While overall materials are lacking across focus groups, everyone spoke to the fact that the TVE program is, has, much fewer resources and materials than students in the dual language program. And then thirdly is facilities. While the dual language program as a whole has moved over the years, it's had a consistent home base and hung club for several years now. And because siblings of students in the program get automatic admission into the program, families have their children all attending the same school. Whereas the way your TVE program has been set up, over the years, different schools have provided different levels of TVE services. So as a student has moved through those different levels, he's had to change schools. And then families that may have students who need different levels of TVE services have students attending different schools. So that again creates inequities, and this was a compliance issue that was brought up in ISBE's report, which the district said that it was going to remedy by the start of this school year, and that has not been done. So again, that is an inequity issue and a compliance issue that needs to be taken care of. And then the third part of our equity finding is that there is inequity in access to the dual language program. When the dual language program was started in this district, it was intended to be the district's bilingual program. This was going to be the program that met all the ISBE requirements for all of the Spanish-speaking English learners. However, the program was never expanded, and it's not available to all the Spanish-speaking English learners who qualify for it. The program as John alluded to, in its current design is only available to 2% of the district's students. And because siblings are automatically admitted, and possibly children of dual language teachers and administrators, there's only a handful of openings each year for your entire district. And because of the small numbers of students who can possibly gain access into the program, it's really created perceptions across your district that this is an elite program and that it's a program for English-speaking students to become bilingual. You know, it's not viewed as a program that's designed to provide bilingual education to Spanish-speaking English learners. And it's also created a lot of concern for parents and other stakeholders, you know, who are questioning, why is this opportunity only available to such a small handful of students? Why shouldn't all of our students be able to learn another language? You know, why only a handful of students? It should be available to all. And then that brings me to our last finding, which is our design and implementation finding. And basically, like John said, the entire EL program, including the dual language program, lacks a cohesive, quality program design and infrastructure. Basically, there are no systemic policies, procedures, or guidelines for the program. And this has really resulted in widespread miscommunication, misunderstandings, misconceptions about the program, a lack of vision for the programs, lack of guidance for the teachers, inconsistent implementation of the program. As we mentioned, there's no standards-based curriculum. There's inadequate materials and resources to properly implement any programs you have. And there's little to no professional development for teachers. And as we said, in the last 10 years, you've had 7 different program directors, many of whom did not have the appropriate credentials, background, and experience in bilingual education and English as a second language. And you know, across focus groups, stakeholders stated that they believe that systemic problems are a result of that inconsistent leadership. That every year somebody new comes in, changes things, and teachers can't even keep up. So that, you know, I believe that inconsistent leadership has caused a lot of the systemic issues you have now. And that brings us to our next steps. So basically, you really need to develop an action plan, a plan that will address your compliance concerns, that will implement programs that are, again, aligned with best practice, what research says is best for ELLs, but one that supports your strategic plan for your district. And I do want to say, moving forward, though, that you need to make changes to your current EL program. You can't move forward with it in the state it's in. And because your district has not met AMAOs for the last 6 years, you're required by the state and federal government to change your program model, your curriculum, your methods of instruction. So you can't move forward the way things are now. But whatever decisions you make, you know, commit fully to whatever you're going to do. You know, make sure that you are willing to fully commit to whatever you plan to do moving forward, and have a strategic plan in place moving forward. I heard a lot of comments across all stakeholder groups that the district tends to act first and then think about it later, you know, and not put that thoughtful process in place moving forward. So I would ask you to come up with a thoughtful plan to address the areas that we found here and a plan that will ensure success for your English language learners.
So with that, we'll take questions.
We can open up questions. The history of English language learners, is it really started in the 60s?
No.
Just the federal requirements.
Programs have existed for hundreds of years.
But the federal requirement was
But
based in the 60s.
on a federal level, it was, and after the Civil Rights Act, the federal government established policy with the Bilingual Education Act. And what the Bilingual Education Act did, it was they wanted to provide federal funds for districts to incorporate native language instruction with English language instruction.
So TBE, that's where TBE came out of that
from a federal policy standpoint.
Okay, so TBE, the difference between TBE and a DL program, because they kind of align very similarly, correct? Do they?
A dual language program. Well, if we're looking at bilingual education, there's different bilingual education program models. TBE is a program model for bilingual education. Dual language is a program model for bilingual education. Developmental bilingual. There are several different program models that will meet that bilingual education requirement.
Okay, so comparing a TBE program and dual language program, would you say one is the antiquated program and the other being the more progressive current modern day program?
I couldn't say that.
Okay. The compliance piece, we're still out of compliance in EL. What DL items are we still out of compliance with?
Well, there's systemic issues that that impact all of your programs. So, for example, again, as far as ISBE, your instruction in English as a second language must be aligned to the WIDA English Language Development Standards. Your instruction in Spanish language arts, which specifically impacts your dual language program, must be aligned to the WIDA Spanish language arts standards, which the dual language and TBE do not have curriculum aligned to those standards. The district is out of compliance regarding professional development for teachers. It's out of compliance for the BPAC. It's, there's several areas that it's still out of compliance with that pertain. There's systemic problems, but that pertain to the dual language program.
You said BPAC. Can you explain that? You said out of compliance in BPAC.
Yes.
How is that out of compliance?
The state of Illinois requires, when you have a bilingual education program, that you have a bilingual parent advisory council. And the council should be made up of parents, teachers, community members, and the majority of members of the BPAC must be parents of TBE students. And your current BPAC, as was cited by ISBE, the majority of members are parents whose children were never English learners or who may have previously been English learners, but that your BPAC is not representative of the parents of your Spanish-speaking English learners, and that the district needs to, and it's mostly parents of students in the dual language program and parents of students in the TBE program are not represented in your
And it's only the students that the TBE students, their parents should be in that program when they're in that program, not once they leave the district. Because I read in here too that people have gone through the program, the parents stay in BPAC. So that would drive it out of compliance, or
Because in the dual language program, your students started out as English learners.
Mhm.
Okay, but over the years they've gained English proficiency, but they're still in the dual language program. Okay, but they're no longer English learners. So their parents, have been a part of the BPAC, let's say since kindergarten. So even though those students are no longer English learners, their parents are still members of the BPAC. But the BPAC is designed, to represent the students who are English learners in the bilingual programs.
But the question shouldn't be what dual language are we out of compliance on. The question in my head should be, how do we fix our compliance with all the Spanish-speaking kids? Because that's what this is really about, is how are our Spanish
You need to fix
speakers.
the compliance issues regarding your entire EL program, some of which, are specific to Spanish-speaking students, but the program was with your entire EL program, the compliance issues.
And so there's on page 3, for those following, when it defines no child left behind, requires that the district provide a high-quality language programs for EL students. Nowhere in this law does it require to have a dual language program. That's just one program that districts may or may not choose.
As John mentioned, on the federal level, the federal government was fully supportive of bilingual education, and the Bilingual Education Act was reauthorized and reauthorized and reauthorized until NCLB. And then the federal viewpoint changed, and the emphasis is on English language acquisition. So from a federal standpoint, we must provide quality English language instruction along with quality grade level academic instruction for English language learners. The federal government leaves it up to states. If they choose to provide bilingual services, they can. And Illinois is one of, there used to be 4, but I believe only 3 states now that require bilingual education. Illinois, Texas, and New Jersey. New York did, but I just read something recently that they no longer. So it's 3 or 4 states in the country require bilingual education. Illinois is one of them. So if you have 20 or more English learners of the same language group in an attendance center, you must provide bilingual education. So you could have 20 English learners who speak Tamil at Oswego East High School in the entire school, and you have to provide them with bilingual education. So that's the law in Illinois. So what Illinois says is you must provide these services, but we're going to leave it up to the school districts to decide which program model they want to use to provide those services.
Does one over the other close the achievement gap any quicker?
Reese?
Speaking of Mike,
Between our other bilingual education program option, TBE, or dual language, does one close the achievement gap any quicker than the other?
I could maybe comment from a broader perspective on this is, if you're within the sphere of what would be considered a best practice, and this is well outside just English language program, this is all program, curriculum and instructional program. If you're choosing within the sphere of what would be considered a best practice, it's gonna matter far less what you choose, and it's gonna matter far more on whether you execute and commit to what you choose. And so, while you can look at research and you can try to carve out some of those nuances, at the end of the day, you're left with, we have a few different approaches that would be considered best practices. And so long as we're within that sphere of best practice, which one is most aligned to us philosophically, which one is most aligned with what we believe. I see you have a strategic plan on the agenda. Which one is most aligned with your strategic plan? And which one are you willing to commit to in the long term? Right? execute, because that's what's going to make the difference. Execution is going to make the difference. Support, commitment, that's what's going to make the difference.
So what you're saying is this necessarily isn't the whole thing about either getting rid of dual language or getting rid of EL or getting anything. It's either putting all of our decision to make one program work or the other program work, not trying to split it up into multiple things. Trying to decide, okay, we're going to do it this way, and that's the way we're going to do it. We're not going to try to split it up into multiple failed attempts into. Well, we've got dual language, EL, and we haven't done it right since. So if we do it with one model and do it correctly, that's about the best way we should do it.
It's about committing to a well thought out model, instructional model and delivery of services.
But not a bunch of multiple different kinds of models.
Well, I mean, in general, these are larger findings of anything. If you can have more cohesive, systemic programming, right, that you can create efficiencies on, align other resources of the district around, and you can align those to broader school improvement, strategic planning. If you can think more systemically, there is no doubt you're going to have better outcomes.
And build equity across that, which we don't see in this program, in this audit.
Right, and the byproduct of being more systemic about what you do and more deliberate about what you do is you eliminate a lot of the inequities. A lot of the side effects of what happens when you have sort of a proliferation of programming and then you have a whole bunch of policies and rules for who goes in which programs, it is going to have fallout of inequity, which is what happens. Complexities tend to produce inequities.
And you can even see that in, like on page 14 in Plank, where some of these DL students, because we didn't have a DL teacher, were given opportunities to go into honors where they wouldn't have qualified had they not moved from that program, which creates inequities of native English speakers that can't get into that honors program because their slots being adjusted to allow those students in. And it's in the second and third, fourth and fifth paragraphs down. And that was somewhat disturbing when we saw that piece. So someone that's trying to get in can't even get in because there's other avenues to get in because we didn't have a dual language teacher because they quit right before school started.
But here's my concern with that one is the very bottom line on that fifth paragraph is that teachers report that dual language students placed in 8th grade honors social study have much lower reading skills than other students in the class.
Mm-hmm.
Like my concern is reading, and dual language is another program, one of hundreds, just like the reading program. We have how many different reading programs in how many different buildings that are all done differently.
Well, and I think that's being worked on as part of the curriculum review.
I'd like to get a little clarification on what you were talking about, the district's sending a value judgment based on dual language sends a message to the children that we value the Hispanic language and culture, and the TBE program is a reflection of the district's not embracing that culture? Is that what you...
No, the intent of that statement was to say that there are two divergent philosophies. And so, if you look at... They're just philosophies, that's all. And once you're in a sphere, I go back, once you're in a sphere of what would be considered about best practice, then it's what philosophies are most aligned to what you believe as a community. The dual language philosophy is a philosophy that you're going to develop students in their language over a much longer period of time. It's a philosophy. The TBE programs is that you're going to develop them in their language until we can transition them.
Well, she said that once in one situation we're sending a value judgment that we do value the Spanish language and culture, and in the other instance we did not. Well, that's what she said. So I'm just trying to clarify that.
That was kind of how I got the idea of it was either one program or the other. Yeah. So I got a whole different feel from this thing from what I read and from what I'm hearing right now. So that's why I'm kind of a little confused.
So
No, I just want to make sure, because I don't think maybe that's how the students are. Maybe that's how the students are perceiving, and I hope, unfortunately, that's not the case. But if that is, that's something we would want to fix, because I don't think that's the message our district wants to send. That we do not value any culture, any language, and I wouldn't want that message to be the case.
Having been part of this message, the intent of that is definitely not that the district is or is not sending messages. That's not the point.
Even inadvertently, I'm not saying that we would do it. I wouldn't want that.
Sometimes the choices that go into these programs is about philosophical positions, and so that that's the intent of that. And of course, you can never control as a school district how stakeholders may or may not interpret or may impose value judgments on some of the policy decisions of the district. But certainly, it's not to suggest that the district's making statements about those.
Now, I think the very fact that we hired a consultant to look at these programs and that we spent a year working on this shows that we do value it, that we do see that there are some achievement issues with our English language learners that we feel have to be addressed. And I would hope that everybody would embrace the fact that we're not just ignoring kids that aren't achieving, that we want to do something to help that work better. It's clear, based on their test results, they are not achieving in many areas. And that's the data I'm seeing.
You don't want to make an abrupt decision.
No, well, we don't, but clearly that's the case. And that's why this board has taken so much time on this issue, because we want to improve the situation for those children.
All right, if I was to just synthesize for the board what the report says in 2 sentences, is that the current state of the program is such that it needs revision to have a sustained set of outcomes that are desirable. And that's the way you do that, the choice you make for how to move forward, that's the work of the board. But the message is that the current state is such that it does need considerable attention, both from a compliance standpoint, but from an impact on outcomes standpoint.
To kind of continue down that path, you made it interesting and I think good comment that we don't test for Spanish proficiency. But I also take that comment and I have to think about what we are charged to do as a district by the state, which is to ensure that all children can function at an appropriate level in English. So is that, I don't want to say typical, but, I look at, we are charged with making sure that every child graduates from this district able to function, speak, read, write in English and possibly another language, right? Are there other districts you've worked with, etc., that are testing the Spanish proficiency, and is that done just to show the benefits of the DL program? Because again, at the end of the day, we're judged by how our students perform on state standardized tests, which are in English.
It just goes to the best practice. One of the core outcomes of a dual language program is to make English native speakers bilingual in Spanish. And so the degree to which you can evaluate the efficacy of the programs in allowing English natives to become biliterate, if you don't have assessments in place, you're never going to be able to answer the question that we started with, is what are students learning? Because it's a core outcome of the program. And so, yes, it would be considered a best practice if you have a major district program with stated outcomes, of which outcomes are to develop biliterate students, that you would be evaluating the English language, the language acquisition both on the English side and the Spanish side. That would be considered a best practice.
But the other goal of that program is to teach the Spanish speakers English, which is what the state is testing them on.
Right, correct. The English piece is covered because it's mandated. The Spanish piece is not mandated. There's no mandate to teach English natives Spanish. But if it's going to be part of a cohesive program model with those as stated outcomes, it would be considered a best practice to measure.
Can I just ask a clarifying question on page 14? Fourth one down. It says of the inaugural dual language class now in 9th grade, only 2 students qualify for AP Spanish. Were those English-speaking students or were those Spanish-speaking students? Do we know?
I don't know. That information was given to us by district staff, but we didn't ask anything for Spanish.
I want to bounce back to Mr. Lightfoot's question about the assessment. He started with, I think I heard you say, is that a norm, or are other districts have something like that in place? And do other districts that have a dual language program, do they have those assessments in place?
Some do, some don't, but the best practice is to.
Of course.
And so there's no doubt about it that the best practice is to have assessments in place.
Here's where I had a little, I thought the report was good overall, but I had a little trouble when the question was to determine whether the children were learning or not and what the basis you used. I didn't see any standardized testing compared to their peers. I didn't see any comparison among other districts with ELL programs and how their students are doing. I don't really see a basis for making a judgment here on what exactly data you used.
Well, just to make sure that everyone's aware of what's in the report. So if we start on page 16, because the analyses that are required do exactly, I think, what you've mentioned. And so, again, we looked at all of the standardized test data that was available for students that were served by the EL program. That includes your access test. That's a state-administered assessment that measures English language proficiency. That's what's contained on page 16. That does a very rigorous comparison of growth in English language acquisition skills for dual language students compared to non-dual language students. And it does a very rigorous analysis of those that were also designated.
But all EL students, though, right? This comparison is among EL only, not among general student populations, correct?
Well, they would never take this test because only English language learners take this test. This is a state-mandated test only for English language learners.
Well, yeah, I get that, but aren't these kids at some point trying to actually get into the mainstream of our educational system where they are proficient enough in English that they can start taking courses along with the other kids and move along? They're not going to be in EL classes throughout their high school career, are they?
But part of the reason we brought up the philosophical piece is because in a dual language philosophy, they wouldn't transition out. They would stay. It's a philosophy. And so the goal isn't to transition them out of the program. That would be a different program model. And so that's why we keep coming back to it's really a discussion around what do you believe is the right kind of programming for this community, because there are there certainly are models out there in which you wouldn't transition them out.
Yeah, I've not seen a student's analysis where we're using Z-scores as the basis for determining whether they're achieving or not. Maybe I just don't understand the data as well as I should.
So let me give a little bit of a deeper explanation into what's going on here. So when you structure the conversation of student achievement, right, as researchers, as policymakers, and as practitioners, we structure that conversation in 2 ways. We talk about achievement status, where are students at any one point in time, right? We know that there are radical differences between EL students and non-EL students as it relates to achievement status. It's called the achievement gap. Right? While the federal government and the state government is focused on closing those gaps, that doesn't give us any information as researchers, as policymakers, as boards of education to make judgments about the efficacy of programs. And so that's why the other piece of the achievement conversation is academic growth or progress. Right? And so the way in which growth is formulated in every scenario, whether you're talking about a research scenario, a policy scenario, and in a practitioner setting, all growth models that would be considered a best practice for measuring growth all work on a differential between what is the expected achievement that you would expect on an individual student and where do they actually end up. Growth in an educational setting is always measured that way. Projected achievement versus actual achievement. You can express that discrepancy between where they were projected to be and where they actually ended up as a Z-score, which just captures what is their relative achievement relative to their past and relative to their peers. And so...
Well, that may be, but I think probably a more lucid model would be to just compare how our kids are doing against similar programs in neighboring districts. That would have been helpful.
That's what this does, though.
It sure doesn't jump off the page at me that way, but okay.
I mean, it's a direct comparison of the educational language progress of your DL and non-DL students against comparable students across the state. That's precisely what that analysis is.
So with back to the growth, our cohort group of students in the DL program are now in ninth grade. Were you able to go back and look at their yearly growth as they progress through the system?
Yeah, we looked
through the program. So how did that cohort class? How has their achievement been in the last 9-10 years?
It all aggregates to that amount of a shift in a standard deviation. And so again, we talk about as researchers, we talk about effect sizes. As you know, how much have we shift a distribution? There are very well established academic guidelines for how much shift of a distribution would be considered educationally relevant. And so we like to look at least a 20% differential in a standard deviation in a Z-score before we could make judgments on whether that is educationally relevant. So those were the thresholds that we used in this report as to any difference that exceeded 20% of a standard deviation was deemed educationally relevant.
So historically speaking, I know we're talking different boards, different administrations, different philosophies. Back in 2010, when the director at the time came forward and presented to move this program up to the junior high level, there was something in there that looked good that was presented because it passed 7.0. Did you have access to that material that was presented at the time, the data and the performance of the students?
We analyzed, I can't speak to exactly specifically that piece, but what I can say is, given all the data that you have available on your students here and the questions that you were asking, we used our best judgment to choose the analyses that we thought best answered these questions.
So out of that first group, Matt, is only 2 qualified for AP Spanish out of that first group through that 8 years, right? So that's somewhat your academic achievement, especially in being fluent in that language, because only 2 qualified.
How are they achieving year to year compared to non-EL peers, both DL and EL? And on top of that, then the other side, also that Spanish assessment, both academic achievement in the English classes, which they are in, plus their Spanish assessment.
Yeah, that's what.
How are they achieving them? How are they?
I can't believe that it's well, since we haven't met the year-to-date standards for 6 years.
We don't know.
No, we do.
No.
State. That's one of the compliance issues.
There's no assessment. There's nothing.
Not in Spanish specifically.
I just don't see it. I don't see it. It's not useful to me.
And isn't it true that if we don't bring that specific compliance issue, that is tied to our funding?
And how much funding, do you know how much funding we get from the state and feds? For EL. Oh, okay. Thank you. Almost $500,000 a year. So man, I'm going back to your question about proficiency of the students throughout. We have more kids that are not in this program that qualify for AP Spanish, I would assume, right? We'd have to. Otherwise, we'd have a class of 2, right?
But we're asking about this group of kids.
We know 2 out of 50 or thereabouts if that was the inaugural year.
And how many kids was it offered to?
AP.
I mean, there was
all of
an
them, because
issue
you can
with
sign
junior
up for the
high
class
and high
when you
school
come
going
to
up
high
and not
school.
having the classes available. So there's a lot of facets to
No,
it. that
you
we
can
don't
sign
know.
up for the class.
There's a lot of facets.
I don't
that we
think that's terribly revealing either way. I don't. I understand what you're saying. You would think.
You can make the assumptions.
You would think that more than two, but I don't think it's anecdotal. I don't think it tells you one way or the other.
So I have one question, and I understand that your first point about cost being negligible, but I just want to make sure that everybody out there who does not have a copy of the report in hand understands that the average for the elementary portion of the kids, average class size for the elementary kids at Hunt Club is 21.8, and our other district schools, I mean, we want to be between 25, 28 kids per class in the elementary. So, I mean, when you say that the cost is less, I mean, if we took and put these kids back in regular classrooms, we could eliminate 2 or 3 teachers, which would save us over $100,000 a year. They're not all TBE students.
So they could be put into other classrooms. I think we were going.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Right.
And
so shouldn't their performance increase if there's only 21, if the ratio is lower versus 25, 26?
Why isn't there?
Par-
Can you repeat the question? Were you asking me a question?
Yeah, I'm just asking out loud to. Pardon me? Yeah, more of a comment. You would think that if there's less students in a class, that their academic achievement should be higher than those with more students in the class. We've heard that argument in the past as well.
What was your number, 25?
I'm quoting.
25, 28, I mean, somewhere that's where we want to be.
I mean, we're getting close. 25. My daughter's class has 24. You're right next to 25.
But if
You're
you
off
take
by
your
one
average
student.
number of kids per class,
Some are higher and some are lower.
But
That's going to be systemic-wide.
21.
That's going to be system-wide.
But you're 2 doors down from a guy whose kindergartner was just in a room of 31 in the same
Which
building.
just got split.
Could you? Where is it? The number of EL students. I'm sorry, I missed that throughout the district. Is that? Is it 800 or something? Okay, I did miss that. Okay.
517 required some sort of TBE services. So, only, and 114 of those receive services through the DL program. So the majority of your students who require bilingual education are being serviced by the TBE program.
to me, some of the other issues that I saw that stood out in this, there were a couple of comments from some of the focus groups about the program, and I know you mentioned it. As an elitist program, dual language is considered an elitist program, and one that was very troubling to me when I read the report was that the non-DL parents claim that native Spanish speakers are taking away spots in the DL program that could be going to native English speakers. I mean, this program was developed for the Spanish-speaking kids to teach them. That is how it's being funded. That is how we fund this program. And for people to make comments like that is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, I know that is the perception of the program. I understand that is the perception. It's the perception of a lot of people that I know. But it's wrong, and the data shows that this does not work. And I mean, it's so far. You know what? This is a public meeting, and if you want to be disruptive, you can be removed.
You can always expand it to be more inclusive, Danielle.
Well, it should be a world language program, not just a dual language program.
Isn't the
Matt.
program to teach?
And then we also have to encourage our administration to take ownership of it, whatever this program's going to look like, because that is the bulk of what they spent the first few minutes of their audit focusing on. There is no leadership. There's no curriculum. No one's taken ownership of it.
Right, you're right there, Matt. Because
Start there. Let's take ownership of it, figure it out, and then move forward.
here's the one piece on the administration. This administration did tell us about all of the compliance issues. The previous administrations never did. The BPAC representatives that I talked to that talked about other directors and how great they were aren't here anymore. Okay? So don't say that the administration, this administration, doesn't take ownership of that. They do. They are taking it over. That's why we're doing audit.
What program? Are you just referring to dual language? No, I agree. We are definitely doing that. Yeah. No, right. We're definitely going to take ownership of the program.
But our governance role is to make sure that we're meeting the law, which is to make sure our native Spanish-speaking, English-learning students learn English and become proficient in the language, in mathematics, in all the core curriculums. It's nothing. This is just one option to do that. And half of the students in this learn a second language, and it is in a lottery system. I mean, when you read that, if you're not upset about that, that's a governance issue that we should be embarrassed about, quite frankly. That should be wiped away immediately. Right. One option is to do the right thing and make sure our native Spanish-speaking English learners learn. And that's the program that we should put in place. Not a program that is popular with 300, 400, 500 people in a district. It should be, that's our job, is to do what is right for those 900 plus students. And not what's important in for this one subgroup. That's our responsibility. That's what the taxpayers hired us to do, and that's where we should be protecting the taxpayer money and the grant money, because we're going to lose it.
We need to fix it.
Right. Yeah,
I agree with that.
I think we need to fix the EL program.
We have to fix it. You can be wildly successful in this country if you have a command of the English language without knowing a word of Spanish. And I'm not trying to say that learning a foreign language is not important or not a great thing to do, but you cannot succeed. You cannot succeed in our country without a command of the English language. And that's what we have to get done for these kids, because they cannot succeed here without that education.
What you're missing is they can coexist.
No, I'm saying they can, that's fine, but first,
it's a philosophical approach, and we as a board have to have that conversation. Philosophically, how are we going to approach it? Is it going to be part of the EL program? I get that. We have that discussion
It has
too.
to be
We
part
have
of
that
the
discussion too.
Dual language has to be part of the E. If you're going to have DL, that's the program it belongs in, not if.
Yeah, exactly.
But it could be a world languages program open to every student in the district.
Is it required to have dual language then? No. As the program under EL.
No, it's a program under EL.
It's a program. It's not a requirement.
No, it's a program.
I just want to clarify that.
It's a program.
From my understanding.
No.
There's no state, federal law that says you have to have dual language.
2% of students in Illinois.
Right.
Let me ask this. Is there like so if we took, just way outside the box here, because I don't even know if this is legal, but if we took those TBE kids that we keep moving into different buildings, that they have what, like 8 or 10 to a class? How many are in those? Right. So some of those, all right, so wait, I didn't understand that then. So some of our TBEs are 20 plus. So So can you add English speakers to those classes?
No. You had one. Did you have a question? Brent, you had a question?
Well, because you need different certifications for those teachers, right?
I had kind of a what are the different, I don't know how to say it, what are the different flavors of dual language? All right, we use an 80-20 model. Okay, I understand there's a 50-50 model. What are there 7, 8, 10, 15, 350 different models of DL?
Those are pretty much the two, 90-10 / 80-20 or 50.
And has there been any research that you're aware of that looks at the difference between those models?
Yes, there is research on that, but I think as John alluded to, what research says is one thing, but the success of the program, the outcomes you're going to gain are driven by the implementation of the program. Is it implemented with fidelity? Do you have all those components of best practice? There's a lot of research out there on components of effective EL programs. Regardless of the program model you choose, if you don't have the necessary components, you're not going to achieve the outcomes that research says that you should.
I understand, but what this board has to decide is, I think the first half of it is we've determined there are major problems with our EL programs, plural, right? We have to make some changes. We have to ask the administration to come up with a game plan. And what I'm saying is, are there things that you guys as consultants recommend? If we have to make changes, how do we know we're making the correct changes, right? We have to go on faith that systemically we're going to change the system, we're going to fix the system, we're going to do what we feel is best to achieve the outcome we desire, which is ensuring that these English language native non-English speakers are achieving and succeeding at or above state standards, right? So our job here as a board is to figure out and to approve what the step forward is on the corrective part of it. So what I'm asking for is there guidance that your firm offers in working with districts or worked in districts in the past that have been in the same situation we're in? Because unfortunately, I'm guessing we're probably not the only school district that's had these problems.
Of course we can help, and of course we've been around this block many times before. But I would bring back, we can help once you've had some discussions as to what it is that you're trying to create. And what I mean by that, and you asked for different flavors of dual language, 90-10, 50-50 being some differences, but you have a two-way immersion. You have English natives and Spanish natives in a dual language program together. There are other models that are just one-way immersion where you'd only have Spanish natives. You wouldn't have English natives. And so the reason why I keep throwing it back, at you is we believe it's our role as consultants to help you understand how all of these different pieces come together, also to give you some structure for the decisions that have to be made. But once we do that, it's not a decision at all about what's going to work better. It really isn't, because it's both a best practice. It's a question of what do we believe is our responsibility as a school board in our function of representing the community. What do we believe, and what are the outcomes that we want to develop? And so that's because there's going to be, again, a multitude of what would be considered best practices approaches to doing that, all of which current research would say if you implement them with fidelity and you execute, the only operating assumption is that you would yield comparable results regardless of the budget. And so,
well, the big difference, correct me if I'm wrong, that we have not talked about is the difference between TBE and dual language is a K-6. That's a 6-year program, and a lot of the TBE programs are a 2 or 3 year kind of get them in, get them out program. Be that good or bad.
Philosophy is just different. philosophy of TBE is to develop English language positions so you can transition them into mainstream programming. That's the philosophy. The philosophy of dual language programs is not to do that. Is to continually develop them in their native language. And even if they, it's just a different philosophical approach. So
we as 308, we've talked about this before, we do what's best for our district, what we as a board discuss and talk about and how we're going to move forward, and don't compare ourselves to a lot of districts. But can you elaborate? Every week, it seems, or like every school year, there are more districts that are coming on board to a dual language type of program. So what are we facing as a district by eliminating our dual language program, going back to a full TBE, when all the other districts around us are moving towards a DL program?
But you have to ask the question, what are you trying to accomplish with these choices? If you're trying to accomplish biliteracy and to make sure that every student in Oswego becomes biliterate, get there first, if that's the goal. Then you can have the conversation is what programmatic models will be best for Oswego to get you to that goal of making sure that every student is biliterate, if that's the goal. And that means that every single English native student here is biliterate. Is that a goal? Have that conversation. Because it's really hard to sit here and say what is going to work or not work best for Oswego until we have a true understanding of really what it is that you're trying to create. We can tell you right now, just look at the data, dual language programs are not widespread. And you can look at the data and just know that. But that doesn't mean that districts aren't trying to get at similar outcomes through other kinds of programs. And so it's really about the outcomes. It's about, do you believe that every Oswego student should be biliterate? That's the question you should take about, including your English natives. Do you believe as a that you have the responsibility as a school district to make sure that every one of your students and all of your English natives as well as your Spanish natives are biliterate?
But we're only letting 11.
Let more in.
Right, because right now about 17 a year have a shot at it.
Can you explain a little bit more about the lottery system and how kids get in and
How 11 of 10
11
are from Hunt Club?
Yeah, that was interesting comment.
and how siblings and administrators and teachers and
School board members.
school board.
We're in the lottery.
I
Not an administrator. I'm on the lottery.
You were in the lottery, I know. And you're on the school
Not
board.
administration.
Yeah, right. I mean, who said a Hunt Club 10 of 11, but they were marked, right? Isn't it?
Okay, let me preface this by saying that no records exist of any lotteries prior to this past year. They disappeared. There are no records anywhere. So any analysis we did of the system is based solely on last year's lottery.
Of the past.
So from the documentation that I looked at, the way the lottery works is there are required, well, first of all, parents of children already in the program fill out a form, if they have siblings that will be coming into kindergarten that they want to enroll in the program. Those siblings automatically get put into the dual language program.
Can you hold on 1 second? Because that's part of my problem with this, is that we don't do that for TBE. Right? Correct? So we do that only if it's dual language. If it's a TBE and they require different services, they could go to different buildings.
Correct.
Okay.
But why
program
are
was around
siblings
each
allowed
other.
in?
That was a district decision, and I can't say why the district made that decision, but my understanding was that I was told that it was so that siblings could attend the same school together. And that, but I can't speak for why the district made that decision because, like I said, there's no records that exist. So parents of children already in the program get to fill out a form saying that they have siblings that will be enrolling in the program. the following year. Then anyone else interested in the program has to attend a required meeting, and then they must fill out an application. And there's a deadline for applications, and then a lottery is held. The names of, so basically though, I'm sorry to backtrack, anyone who says they're a native Spanish speaker, their child is assessed to see if they're limited English proficient. And if they're found to be found to be English proficient, if they're found to be in limited English, if they're a Spanish-speaking English learner, they go into one baggie. Their names go into one baggie. Everybody else's names go into another baggie. And based on, once we see how many slots are available, we pick names out of this baggie for how many slots for Spanish-speaking English learners we have, and then we pick names out of this baggie for how many slots we have for English speakers. And anybody whose
plastic baggie?
Clear plastic baggie?
The transparent.
A transparent Ziploc baggie. Names are written on little slips of paper in marker and folded in half.
And I assume this lottery is conducted in public?
No, it is not.
Oh, so where is it conducted at?
That's also a good question.
And who pulls the...
That again is a good question. The process is not transparent. My understanding is that the program administrator conducts the lottery. That's my understanding, but again, like I said, I only saw records from last year.
And who drew them last year?
I can't say that. There's no record that states who did it or witnesses.
Did we call any old administrators to see?
And would you admit that?
That you drew names out of a clear plastic baggie?
Is it notated how many are left over after the names are pulled?
Yes. Now, a waiting list is supposedly created with the names of the remaining students. Letters are sent out to the parents of the students who gained admission through the lottery into the program, and those parents are told that you have until a certain date to indicate if you're going to accept your slot in the program. And if you don't send this form signed and dated back by a certain date, your child will lose their slot and it will be given to someone on the waiting list. The parents whose children did not gain entry into the program get that same letter saying, we're sorry your child, did not gain access to the program, but they're on a waiting list, and if we do not, at a certain date, any spots available, we'll pull from the waiting list. But again, it was found that those deadlines weren't adhered to.
So in that waiting list, how many were on that waiting list this year for the lottery that you were able to find?
I don't think I have it in the report. There were a handful, maybe 3 Spanish speakers and several English speakers. There were not many students. But again, when we're talking about, having clear policies, procedures, and adhering to them, if I was a parent whose child was on the waiting list and I found that they really didn't adhere to that, parents didn't commit to the deadline, but they, their child still got in later. And again, just by looking at the records, it appears that students who gained entry into the program, it's questionable how their names ended up on the final list, if their names were still in the baggies. There were just some inconsistencies with the program and with the implementation of the lottery system. And I think you did ask about automatic. Mm-hmm. So siblings are automatically, if the district clearly states in the dual language information that siblings of students in the program, get admitted automatically. But then in the bylaws of the Bilingual Parent Advisory Council, it states that in addition to siblings getting automatic entry into the program, children of dual language teachers and administrators also get automatic entry into the program. But that's only stated in the BPAC bylaws. It's not stated in any other district documents.
How did we get to the 10 of 11 being Hunt Club?
On the list of students, it gives their name, their home school, information. The names of Hunt Club students were highlighted and marked at the top of the page as Hunt Club. So for some reason they were identified on the list of applicants for the lottery, and 10 out of the 11 students from Hunt Club were admitted this year.
That would theoretically keep busing costs down because it wouldn't be from across the district. So it was picked from a Churchill or Wheatlands, but no, 10 of the 11 going in that program are there. So that's how some of those costs. Yeah. Yeah, so.
That's interesting because I have a memo here from January 2012 that stated that 46% of the students accepted into the program, their home school was Lakewood Creek.
I do remember that. That's way on the other side of the district.
Is that broken down between Spanish and English speaking, Brent?
Those are the English speaking.
Your data is from last year, though, right? The 10 from Hunt Club, or 11, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because that's all she could find.
Right. No, I know. Okay. Any other questions for our presenters on the audit? Okay. Thank you very much. It's very enlightening. Based on this, we'll have that meeting next week and talk about. We have a discussion on philosophy and giving direction, and vote on giving direction to Dr. Wendt regarding the EL program. We've had this data for 2 weeks, so my comment on the November 17th, where we get data 2 weeks prior to making any decisions, is correct and accurate. So we've had this data since December 1st. So we're going to give direction. We're going to give.
We haven't talked about the direction
yet. I don't know how you can support the way this program is structured with respect to entry.
We haven't discussed it yet as a board.
Well, that's what we're going to talk about.
That's fine.
Yeah. What is this program? The way it's structured right now, and the entry, and parents getting ready for next year. We can't sit on this and wait on this. This is embarrassing. There's no other way to say it. So, at a minimum, the EL program has so many deficiencies in it that at a minimum, we should, my opinion, that we should direct the superintendent to look at the entire program and restructure the entire program to get it in line and within compliance. That would be my recommendation.
To restructure the entire EL program.
Yeah.
But what does that entail?
I'm not an educator, so that's what the educators will do. Our direction, just like we did with special ed and with other programs, is to say, fix the program. And that program may or may not include dual language. It should be to go back to what our stated governance is, which is to adhere to the law, and the law says to make sure our native Spanish-speaking students become English proficient. Period.
As long as it's done methodically and all options are on the table.
Man, we put all options on the table. We look at everything. We do all the data. this
very much.
this is very obvious. So that
This is obvious?
yeah, that the entry level into a program, that the inequities in the program are all over the board. There's inequities all over this program.
Absolutely. There are things that need to be changed and corrected and brought into compliance. So if that's what we're charging them to do, great.
Yeah, and only 2% of all the districts in the state of Illinois use this program.
That's irrelevant to our discussion.
How many? We always
what's the
talk about
what's the
district-
percentage of districts in the state of Illinois that have online learning?
One.
Wow.
One.
Right.
One.
Right.
Hey,
we
focus
just
and
got
make it great, Phil.
I am focusing on making it great.
We can turn
Right?
it around.
There's 900 and some students that need us to make it a great.
Yeah, we're working on special.
It,
There
it,
are
it,
things
it seems like we're going to be here for quite a while, so maybe I'll just make a motion for a 10-minute break. Does anybody second that?
We could take it.
Come on, take a 10 minutes. They're going to be here a while. It looks like. So.
We got a couple of.
Yeah.
How long is the waiver of the
So if the board's fine with that, we can take a